Well, I got a new bike. As you can see here, it's a 2020 Trek Remedy 9.8. And now if you've been following my channel at all, you know that I was riding a pretty dialed pivot switchblade set up in 29er. So it's like, why a new bike? You already had a good one. Well, aside from just wanting to try something new out, I had a couple of different reasons. One of them, the switchblade was a 29, and since coming to the Midwest, it just wasn't as much fun with how tight and technical, or not technical, but just how tight and twisting the trails are. So I wanted to go down to a 27.5 bike just to make it a little more maneuverable, a little more manageable on these trails, just to have a little more fun. The other reason I went with this bike is I've been riding a lot more BMX lately, so I wanted this bike to be able to handle more like the BMX bike. And so far it has. It's been great going on my kicker ramp. It's been awesome for bunny hops. I can get some pretty good height on the bunny hops. Just as far as driveway jibs, endos, G-turns, all that stuff. Fantastic, even with the limited steering from the knock block. And it wheelies so well. I don't wheelie well, but the bike itself does a great job. Gets right up in there and goes. And if I could just keep my balance point, it'd be great. No problems there. So when I started searching for a new bike, I knew that I wanted something that was closer to the BMX feel. And in the world of mountain biking that we're in now, everything is trending towards really long reach and super slack head angles. And I wasn't really looking for that. So the geometry on the Remedy is a little bit more modest and just kind of, checked all the boxes there for me with a pretty reasonable reach. And it's still slack. I mean, 65.5 degrees in slack, 66 in steep mode. So you still get into some trouble and have some bike to get you out of it, but also you're not so slack that you just have a wandering front wheel. Bike has 160 millimeters of travel on the front, 150 in the rear, so there's plenty of stuff there to get me out of trouble when I get myself into it. So this bike is completely stock, so I'm not going to go over all the little nuances of the spec. You have the internet. You can take a look at Trek's website to figure out all the nitty-gritty of the spec. But when I was originally looking for the bike, I was going to get a Remedy 8, but I got a really good deal on this 9.8. And the upgrades you get with the 9.8 over the 8 are a carbon frame, carbon wheels, carbon bars, and a nicer stem. Everything else is pretty comparable. In my opinion, like the Fox 36 performance versus the Lyric Select that comes on the 8, it's not that big of a deal to me. And the bike does come with SRAM G2 RSC brakes and the SRAM GX 12-speed drivetrain. And then it's just been a great working bike. I don't have any real complaints, but the jury's still out on a couple things. And I want to discuss those things. So first of all is the Reactive Shock. And the idea of the Reactive Shock, just bare bones there, is that it gives you a really good pedaling platform without losing the integrity of like the big hit stuff. And it's kind of their newest iteration of an old proprietary shock they had called the DRCV shock, or dual rate control valve, which in my opinion was a hunk of shit. And it would blow through travel so fast. So far riding this bike off some drops and just down some different terrain and jumps and everything, I haven't had any issues with it blowing through the travel. And doing some climbs, I definitely noticed that pedaling support is there, but the jury's still out on that shock, on its longevity, how it does with heavier riders like myself. One thing I've really noticed with it is that when I'm taking this bike down a set of stairs or anything with those square edge hits, it feels really dead. And it's just not very inspiring or lively feeling. It handles it fine, but it just feels dead, like there's a dead zone in there. And I don't know if that is because of the Reactive Shock on there, or if it's because of the angle of the shock here. So I could put a different shock on this bike and it may just completely get rid of that dead zone feel, and it may not. The jury's out on it. I'm not going to replace this shock until I ruin it, and then I'll put something cool on there. But for right now, the proprietary reactive valve or Reactive Shock is working fine. The other thing on this bike that's kind of suspect with me is the knock block. So when we're looking at this bike, you can see this tube, this down tube, is completely straight, whereas most bikes flip out like this and then down to allow clearance for the top of the crown. This bike does not, and that is to give the bike a lot more predictable steering and a lot more stiffness, so it's just a nicer ride quality. However, because of that, the fork crown would impact the down tube on a wreck or anything like that. So Trek put in this knock block thing to keep the turning radius down, and it hasn't affected me on the trail at all. It's been fine on the trail. In fact, it keeps you from like washing your front wheel out. But I want to do X-ups, and this bike will not allow me to do X-ups. I'm also not a real big fan of just the ergonomics of the dropper post lever. It's not a big deal. I can probably mess with the adjustment on the lever as far as its placement, and it'd be fine, and I'd prefer some different grips on the bike. Those are just little things. Otherwise, honestly, this bike has been really killer for me. I don't have any complaints, but I'm also riding Midwest stuff. And so when the time comes next week, I'll be in the West riding some of the Rocky Mountain stuff, and that'll give me a little bit better idea of how this bike is handling everything. But for now, first ride, first impressions. This bike's been ripping on the downhills. It holds its speed well. It rips through corners. It has made the trails here in the Midwest a lot more fun for me, and it climbs like a freaking goat. I am not in the greatest shape at the moment, and I definitely am not as slim as I'd like to be, and I can get up hills like it's nothing. The dropper's been great. Everything has been really great about it. But again, suspect components on this thing's gonna be that reactive shock. Is it gonna last? Does it actually feel that great? Will I start blowing through the travel more? Will a aftermarket shock feel better for me? We'll see what the rocks out west tell me. And then again, that dropper post ergonomics, not the biggest fan of it. Could use some better grips. But overall, the suspension's been great. That Fox 36 has been performing well. The tires feel great. Actually, the tires that come on this are pretty damn good. So for the money, this is a really killer bike. I've been super happy with it. On the trail, no issues whatsoever. I can't do X-ups though, thanks to that knock block on there, and we'll just have to see. So again, this is just a first ride impression, just really quick nitty gritty run through. And I'll post an update review video after my trip out west. So I hope you found this helpful. I'm sure there's a lot of information that I just gleamed over that you'd like to know, and if you have any questions, leave them in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, go ahead, consider subscribing, and thanks for watching. Enjoy the remainder of the clips.
Holy fuck! Oh ho ho! There it was.
What the hell was that?
I don't know.